So I wanted to do a little bit of a background on my solar experience. I started, about a year and a half ago. I've been toying around with the idea of trying to get into solar, and I really don't remember what um, was the determining factor, but I finally decided to jump in and see if it was even a feasible concept for me. I started watching a bunch of YouTube videos. I could start naming names of the different channels, but if you've researched any solar at all, you know the main guys' names. Um, and I'd find one channel and binge watch that channel and learn as much as I could, and they would mention another channel, and so I'd just start channel jumping all over the place. And I even got into some of the homesteading channels where people are starting their own homestead and developing their own solar system and putting that in place to power their homestead. And so I'd get into those and I learn a lot and spend a whole lot of time watching YouTube videos. But so I started, was it last July, with a Renogy package that came with a single 100-watt panel, a 40 amp charge controller, and I had at the time a garage sale inverter that I think was a 750-watt inverter. So in the picture here, you can see the Renogy. This was basically my first hookup attempt. Um, well, I guess my second one, because inverter down here is a different inverter. The 750-watt inverter just wasn't doing what I was planning on it doing. I was trying to run some power tools and stuff, and just the surge. It was a old modified sine wave inverter, I believe, and it just kept dying on me, screaming. Um, and I forgot to mention, I started with one old deep cycle battery. Uh, and for my initial tests, it works. So here's a picture of the Renogy 40 amp charge controller. Um, I got a 2200-watt, I don't know how to pronounce this name, Giandel pure sine wave inverter that actually has been running a lot of my stuff for quite some time. It's actually a great inverter. It's got two outlets on the front, remote switch, plus you can hardwire in a circuit for heavier loads. And so for a while, it sat on the bench right next to the inverter. This is my little setup. Um, and it looks like it in this picture, I had actually bought another 100 amp hour deep cycle battery. So that I knew this one was new. Um, the old one that I had that I was testing with at first just wasn't enough. Uh, Came out of my folks' old boat, I believe, as a spare. So I really don't know what the state of the battery actually was. Had a Renogy shunt just to help me keep an eye on power usage. And my single panel that I just sat out, leaned it up against the ladder, and you can see in the grass the solar lines that I had run through the grass over to the barn. Over time, we had to mow the lawn, and I got tired of having to move the ladder every time. So I threw it just up on top of the barn roof and ran the lines right in the window, uh, directly into the inverter. So popped the screen out, and that worked well. I mean, it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't screwed down or anything, just kind of sitting up there. Um, and as time progressed, I decided that I needed to get the inverter and charge controller out of my shop inside my barn. So the wall here is the outside wall of my wood shop. So much dust and everything flying everywhere. I didn't want it flying in, getting sucked inside these pieces of equipment and then damaging them. So I poked a little hole, the batteries on the other side of the wall here, put the charge controller and the inverter outside, just to keep the wood dust out of it. And then on the inside, we had the two batteries that I put together in parallel and ran them through a fuse. And then I had picked up a Victron Smart Shunt 500 amp to give me a little more accurate analysis of my power usage as opposed to the Renogy. And the Victron worked great. And again, over time, one panel wasn't enough to recharge the batteries, so I picked up two more and made a little frame for the roof, but still hadn't, made anything permanent. You can still see the lines flowing from the roof down and through the window. And I finally cleaned things up, spent a day or so poking a hole into the roof, mounting an actual quote unquote roof mount system on the barn roof. And that was nice to not have any lines going down and dangling, and I'd be able to actually close the screen into the shop. Again, progressing over time, I've had so many revisions of this solar system, it's not even funny, but I had upgraded to a Victron smart solar charge controller, 150 volt, 35 amp with Bluetooth capability. And this really gave me the ability to see how much solar was coming in, because, the entire proof of concept for me was to determine exactly how much solar we get. Is it feasible where we live, where I have to put my panels? Can I get enough sun to recharge the batteries to be able to supply power to the devices and the equipment that I need? And so I needed some kind of an insight, and Renogy just didn't offer that at all into the production from the solar panels. And then I got into, I think I came across the HB Powerwall YouTube channel and saw the 18650 aspect, and I thought, that would be neat because I could just recycle everything, move away from the lead acid. And so I bought a box of used cells from Battery Hookup, and you can see them all here, and spent the time going through and dissecting and pulling them all apart and then testing the cells and finding the bad ones. Lots of these little packs, and it took time, but it was a neat learning experience going through and just figuring everything out. Then I probably got, I don't know, 50 or 60 out of the pack, and I actually ended up getting one 6-hour Ryobi pack that was still good, so I still use that one. Marked down after all the testing was complete, I went through and marked down all of the milliamp hours that came through from the tester. It was just hours and hours and hours of testing these things and trying to organize the cells into a pack. And my entire thinking was I was going to build a 100 amp hour pack from these cells, and then they ended up sitting on my desk for forever. And I came across some YouTube videos where people were showing that, the lithium ion cells, they can combust. Not that they're going to, but they have a potential for a thermal runaway event that could be potentially catastrophic. And I saw as people started talking about this chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, and so I started digging some more into that chemistry, and it's supposed to be a very, very safe chemistry. And so you can see in this picture here, I had purchased a pre-built pack without the BMS. No, maybe I did order it with the BMS. A pre-built pack, 100 amp hour. I want to say they were, I don't remember what size cells they are. They're not 20. Well, anyways, it's bundles of lithium iron phosphate cells in 3.4 volt configuration, which when you put those together, you get your 12-volt battery. And so in this picture, I kind of just pushed all the lithium ion cells off to the side and started working with this lithium iron phosphate pack. And another big reason that I switched from the flooded aspect to even initially looking at the lithium ion cells was the fact that you're not supposed to discharge your flooded lead acid battery past 50% because you start damaging your battery. And so, I had these flooded batteries that were cheaper than the lithiums, but I could only use half the capacity. So I decided that I needed to look into something that would allow me to utilize the full capacity, and something that was a safer chemistry from the lithium ion, and went with this pack to start, and made some modifications in the barn because the lithium iron phosphate, boy, I'm gonna just keep getting those back and forth, aren't I? The lithium iron phosphate, you're not supposed to charge when the temperature is below 32 degrees. So I had to reconfigure my little storage area that I had in the shop for the batteries. So I think in another picture here, but down here at the bottom is actually a chest freezer that I put the battery pack inside. And wired it up a little more, put a little Raspberry Pi up here so that I could communicate with the Victron VRM and be able to remotely see the status of my charge controller and then the Victron shunt, which would allow me to see power coming in and out of the battery pack. So here's a picture inside the chest cooler. I just bought I don't know, what is it? Typically you see these in boats, the battery holder, and I put the lithium iron phosphate cell in there and closed the lid, and it kept it pretty static temperature for the time being. And then I kept using it more for the tools and the stuff in the shop, and it 100 amp hours just wasn't enough anymore. So I had to buy another pack so that I could have 200 amp hours. So going through and balancing the packs together, and this was my build of my 200 amp hour pack. So you're taking 2 packs, putting them in parallel, and then you're paralleling the 2-pack, or excuse me, then you're putting the 2-pack in series with the other 3 2-packs. And then running everything through the BMS. And I even put on a little active balancer on there because I know that the BMS's balancing was whatever, 175 milliamps or something like that. Whatever it was very small to keep the pack balanced. So, oops. And then I started getting into the prismatic cells, looking at a larger battery pack in the future. And these are 280 amp hour cells that I ordered from China, I believe. Shenzhen Basin, I believe. So each cell is 3.2 volts nominal, and then you put those in series to get your 12-volt pack. And so in the freezer, I had the one battery pack of the 200 amp hours, and I built a little rack and a shelf on top, and I put the prismatic cells on top of that. And so I had the 200 amp hour in parallel with the 280 amp hour, giving me a 480 amp hour battery, which was awesome. I had hooked up my barn lights to it. I hooked up a few outlets in the shop, and it just worked great. And actually, I don't know if I have a picture of this, but if you look over here on the right, this white cord coming down. So as it got into wintertime, I started getting these low temperature notifications from the VRM that my batteries were getting very close to that freezing temperature. And you can't charge these batteries. You can discharge them down to, I believe it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit, but you cannot charge them once they drop below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So I had to figure out a way to keep the batteries warm because I couldn't move them from where they were at the time. And so we ended up figuring out a way. I ran a little light bulb down into the chest freezer. I think it was a 40 watt light bulb, and I hooked that up to a thermostat controlled outlet. And then I opened that outlet up and extended the temperature sensor by about, I don't know, 8 feet. And that's what you see, these two red lines here. And the temperature sensor is down at the bottom of the box. And so when the temperature would get below, I think the lowest setting that could go down to is 40 degrees. So when a temperature in the box got down to 40 degrees, the light bulb would turn on, warm up the box to 45 degrees, and then it would turn off. And that worked great. Kept my batteries nice and warm. Didn't have to worry about disabling charging because the batteries being too cold. Just worked great. And another iteration of just cleaning things up, adding battery disconnects so that I could isolate one battery pack from the other if I needed to. I think these were 125 amp hour breakers. They say amp hours, 125 amp breakers. And then I had swapped out my fuse for a Class T fuse, 200 amp Class T fuse. And then I got itchy. I wanted to use the battery, use the solar in the house. And the house is, 50 some feet away from the barn. And I had just been running a heavy gauge extension cord along the fence, through the backyard, into the window of the laundry room, and then just plugging some stuff in there. And I ran the washing machine that way for a while. And, it worked fine, but having an extension cord just run through your backyard doesn't, it doesn't look good to me. I like the nice and neat aspect. But you've got your voltage loss across that long of a cord and everything. So I wanted to run a hard line into the house. And so here this picture's, I don't know, probably February maybe of this year. Freezing cold, can't dig, ground's frozen. And so I just got some conduit and clamped it to the side of the fence and ran some line through there from the barn. And then it came around the fence and up into the house right here. And I got to the point again where I needed more power because I needed more solar, so because I was trying to run some things in the house. And being it was initially a 12-volt system, the charge controller can only handle up to 500 watts of solar incoming. So I was looking to get more panels, and I ended up having to get another charge controller too, so that I could technically support up to 1,000 watts of solar coming in. And so I had I had gotten the blue solar accidentally, bought it off of eBay, and ended up selling that and then having to get another of the same model smart solar charge controller so that they could communicate back and forth. And the Victron gear does a great job of communicating between themselves and passing on relevant information and displaying that information in the VRM for you. So I had to get, I think the blue solar was their older model, didn't have Bluetooth, so I had to switch that out. But I had picked up some more solar panels and really didn't want to mess with the roof at that time. So I just built a temporary rack along the side of the fence. And it actually worked out well because along the side of the fence is much more southern facing for me. So I had the fence array or the ground array run into one charge controller, and then the roof array run into another one. And then spring came along. I had already had most of the supplies to be able to actually trench a proper trench from the barn to the house and get that stuff off of the fence on the other side. And so started hand digging because I knew I had an electrical line already coming from the house and a gas line in there somewhere, a propane line. My son wanted to help, and so I let him do a lot of the gluing of the pipe connections. He seemed to enjoy it. And so after we got all the conduit run and all the lines pulled into the conduit, we had to move all the equipment into our utility room, which just having that temperature controlled environment plus having your power source closer so you don't have your voltage drops along that huge long run just seemed to work out a whole lot better for me. Plus it's right outside my office, so I can always keep an eye on things if I need to. But the solar lines from that trench would come in, drop down. I've got a bunch of spare excess behind this panel here. I got my solar disconnects, charge controllers. I mean, it's the exact same setup as what I had inside the barn, except it's all together. They don't have it split on walls. The cabling is much shorter. And I have easier access to hooking up a hard line. And I had ordered sometime early spring, I think, racking system, an actual racking system for the barn roof, because I kept seeing a lot of build up and stuff around the the wooden rack that I had put on there initially for the 3 panels, and I knew I needed to expand it more to add some more panels. And so my son and I, no, my grandpa came over and actually helped me put up um, this racking system on the barn roof and got things moved over. And that worked out so much easier to set up, so much smoother than the wood one. The bracketing, just I don't care for the cost of it, but for the simplicity, um, I think it might be worth the cost, especially when you're doing a roof mount. And then came the final decision to switch over from a 12-volt system to a 48-volt system. And I came to the thinking of, was it feasible? Yes. And I had toyed around with the idea of putting a whole house generator on before this solar even came to play. And I started thinking from the generator aspect, I'm like, that's a lot of money. I mean, you're spending a lot of money on something that's going to sit out in your yard and only get used for your weekly tests. It runs, 10, 15 minutes a week. But then it only gets used when the power goes out. And if you're in an area that the power goes out a lot, that might be worth it to you. Where I live, I wouldn't say it goes out a lot, but it goes out at weird times. Like it's a perfectly sunny day and we lose power. The storms roll through and trees are down everywhere and we don't lose power. That doesn't make any sense. But so spending a lot of money on something that's going to sit in my yard and only get used when the power goes out, well, that's a lot of money to spend. Why not spend that money on something that's going to be able to save you money daily? And not to mention, when you have to run your generator, you still have to pay for fuel for that generator too. So depending on how long your power's out, you have to go through and pay for propane, natural gas, whatever your fuel supply is. And so I decided to switch over from a 12-volt system to a 48-volt system, put in 2 big battery banks to start with. And basically switch over, excuse me. To start, I'm going to switch over one of my panels in my house. I've got 2 sub panels in the house, and one panel is based almost all 120-volt supply. So here the batteries came in before anything else that I ordered. I ordered the batteries, the panels, and the inverters all on the same day. And batteries came in first. I mean, I think they showed up within a week. And so I've got 32 280 amp hour cells that'll be combined into 2 16 cell pairs in parallel. When the panels showed up, I ordered 11 because every place that I was looking to order them from, they're like, if you don't order the number that you need, order more. So I wanted to order 10. And so based on their recommendations, because apparently, they get damaged a lot in shipping and it can really hold up your project. So I ordered 11 and they are 455 watt solar ever panels made in the US, which I was happy to support something made in the US. And when I got them, all 11 were fine. So I have 11 that I have to contend with. And so I started building a temporary rack and leaning them up against the fencing inside the backyard, just hooking them up, trying to see how well they work. And, you know, I've got these panels, I might as well try and get some usage out of them until the rest of the hardware shows up. Just going through and balancing packs again. So here's the racking system that I ordered to help support the weight of the new battery packs. The rack on the right is my old rack that I was using for the 12-volt system. Just wasn't beefy enough to support the weight from the 16 cell pair packs. And the other thing is the shelf is actually made of a non-conductive material, which is nice. That's why the batteries on the right, you see, I threw them under a piece of wood underneath them because I didn't want the cells in direct contact with the metal wire racking. In this picture, so I had pulled out a few more of the new larger panels and lean them up against the fence. And then my wife and son and I went through and actually switched out the 4 100-watt panels that we had on the roof for 4 of the new 455-watt panels, just getting in preparation for the conversion over to the 48-volt system. And so at that time, I think I had 2 of these set up in parallel, and then the 2 parallels were set up in, no, let me see here. 2 in series, and then the other, and then connected in parallel to the 2. So the bottom 2 are in series, the top 2 are in series, and then they are parallel together. Really, really overkill, a lot of extra, a lot of power wasted basically because the solar charge controllers on the 12-volt system can only handle up to 500 watts. And, you know, one of these panels is basically that full supply, but this was more for the cloudy, rainy days, so I could still at least get close to that 500 watts per day. And then I had the same setup down here on the ground. So these middle ones, the old 100-watt panels were disconnected. And then I had these 2 in series and these 2 in series, and then the 2 sets were parallel together. Just cleaning up all the wiring for the BMS connections. I drilled and tapped connections into the bus bars for the BMS lines for each cell. Tried to make it as neat as I could. It's just so hard when you've got all these long wires that you have to deal with. And, you know, I kind of took some ideas from Andy over at the Off-Grid Garage because he kind of did some of his in a similar fashion. And so I looked at how he did it, how he laid them out, and, you know, liked the neatness and how it looked. And so I kind of took some of those ideas from him. And then I had to build some ground framing for the panels because when we mowed the backyard, we would get grass clippings and everything just thrown up on the edge of the panels because they're leaning right on the ground. So I built a handful of these wooden racks and got the panels up off the ground. You can see we got all 4 of them off of the ground now. And I still have to go through and actually make a few more of those for the remaining panels. Once I was on vacation, the inverter finally showed up. So I think it was a week for the batteries to show up, maybe 2-3 weeks for the panels to show up, and then the inverters were like 2 months because they were stuck in port basically. And so I ordered 2 EG4 6500EX inverters, which would give me 6,500 watts of inverting power and allow me to put 2 of them into a split phase configuration so I can use 200 40-volt appliances at the house. And they have the ability to have 8,000 watts of solar input off of two 4,000 watt MPPT charge controllers built into the hardware. So they finally showed up, like what, the day after we left. And I was going to be gone for a week. So I really couldn't wait to get home, start getting into things. And I think the day after I got home, I pulled one of those inverters out of the box and started getting it hooked up to one of the battery packs on my 48-volt shelf. And I also ran the one hard line that I had in this panel down into the inverter. So the 12-volt system was still running. I guess I forgot to say that. So once I moved all my 12-volt system into the house, I had extension cords running all over the place, but the 12-volt system was powering my entire office with all the internet gear, the computers, and that kind of stuff. Our freezer down in the basement, all the outlets in the laundry room except for the dryer, and then the refrigerator upstairs. And so the laundry room was the only real hard line into the 12-volt system. Everything else was extension cords. And so I disconnected that hard line for the laundry room from the 12-volt system and ran it into one of the 6500 EXs and basically split my environment in half. So the 12-volt system was still running my office and the freezer downstairs, and the 48-volt system was running the laundry room upstairs and the fridge. And for all intents and purposes, you know, you don't run the washing machine all the time, and there's not a whole lot of stuff in the laundry room, so it was really just running the fridge. And then this is just another shot of it being temporarily hooked up, and I'm doing it temporarily because I want to pull everything off of the wall and get it reorganized, and I will use the second 6500 EX, mount that first, and just start getting everything wired up. But that allows me to still use the batteries and the solar and everything while I am getting, the final version set up. Yeah, just a picture of the front. And so last night was the night that I actually went through and cut over the ground array. I switched all those panels from 2P, 2S configuration, or 2S, 2P, I guess, to a 4S configuration. So put all four of the panels in series. And then I also added a fifth panel because I had room, and ran those into the 6500 EX. And I also, and I don't have pictures of some of this stuff, but I went through and moved, I had to hardwire in a set of outlets because the 6500 EX doesn't have any outlets built into it. And the old 2200 watt 12-volt inverter that I had two outlets that I was plugging stuff directly into. So I ended up moving. Once I got the new line hardwired in, I moved all the loads off of the 12-volt system to the 48-volt system last night. And then today I ended up switching over the roof array from 2 series, 2 parallel, 2S, 2P into a 4S configuration, and then put that all into the second input and the second MPPT charge controller on the inverter. And that's basically where I'm at so far. I wanted to be able to document some of this progress over the last year and a half, all the different iterations. And it's been a challenge. It's been interesting. It's been expensive. I'm one of those guys that if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right the first time. I don't want to, hodgepodge it and just make it work. I'm trying to do everything as much as I can to as close to code as I can possibly do it to my knowledge. I'm not an electrician. I know enough to be dangerous, but I wanted to make it nice. I want to make it look neat. And the problem is when you try to do things the right way, it costs more. I mean, if I didn't have to put all the little fuses and all the little, protections in place, then sure, I could have done this for dirt cheap, but I want to do it right. And so the next plan is basically going to be the decommissioning of, let me see if I can find it here. To decommission this wall here. And we'll see if that actually happens tonight or not. I don't know, but I'm going to try and do better about actually videoing and recording these little things and, just making documentation of the progress. I mean, pictures work great, but if you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know, or even if you don't remember what some of the stuff was or some of the reasons why you did things, it can, you just lose all that. So if I can do it this way, we'll see, and I know I've got some folks that have been curious about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And so this should help them as well. So I guess I've rambled on long enough. We'll end this here and hopefully pick up next time when I start the decommissioning process. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.